Can other people push your buttons? That's what we're going to talk about today. All right, hi, this is Jill from the North Woods with another one of the lessons I learned that got my life put back on track. This one's a funny one because you have to realize I was a tiny little kid in this very chaotic family situation, and there was this fellow who gets on TV during one of fundraiser weeks where they have a bunch of speakers and authors come on. I don't even know if they do this anymore. But suddenly this fellow named Wayne Dyer gets up in front of everyone and starts talking about his book, Your Erroneous Zones. And I think my eyes grew like saucers when I saw what he was talking about. And again, I was very young. You could imagine what a weird little kid I was, because after I read this book, we had this bully that was in my neighborhood. And I remember one day she came to my door wanting to beat up someone who was over at my house. And I said, you just do this because your parents push you around, your older brothers and sisters push you around, and so now you're just looking for someone that you can pick on. And started pulling out all these things from this book. And I don't think she got what I was talking about, but she was so stunned about the baloney that was coming out of my mouth, because I was just a kid, that she just left and never beat up that other person. So I felt like I had won. This particular book, at this particular time in my life, even when I was very tiny, changed my life. And I'll talk a little bit about why. I think this book changes lives for different people in different ways. So the full title is Your Erroneous Zones, Step-by-Step Advice for Escaping the Trap of Negative Thinking and Taking Control of Your Life. And he goes through a bunch of different types of erroneous thoughts that are controlling the way you are. Anger, if you've met angry people, they crack. They can't withhold their anger. Worry is something that you can't do a thing about. I know Rick Warren talks about worry as being a Christian, but living like an atheist. You don't think that God has your life in his control. When you're worried about something, there's 3 different ways that things are controlled. There are some things you can control. That's a very small pile. There are things other people control, and you can't do a darn thing about it. And then there are things that God controls, and you know he has your best interest in heart. So worrying about any one of those 3 things is ridiculous. If it's your doing, do something about it. But if it's someone else, or if it's in God's control, pray about it, learn something about it, and let it go. So that was the worrying part of thing. Then there is guilt, and that is worrying about something in the past. You can't get over something you did. And again, if you did something to someone, rectify it. Make up with that person. Apologize for it, but not dwelling in it. Insecurity, you're just not good enough. Instead, you got to get to this place in life where you trust yourself and you trust God that whatever comes your way, you lose your job, you get a sick diagnosis, something like that, you're going to work through it step by step. But insecurity, this inability to trust that things are going to ever work out. I've seen people lose jobs and have it destroy their lives. And you know what's funny about it is every time I changed my job, it got better. Things got better. And maybe I was just more stuck. And instead of always having insecurity, I have a lot of insecurity when it comes to my work world. I'm all I have other than God. And that's where you forget it. You start worrying about the fact that you can't get out of this. If I lost my job, I might lose this house. I might lose everything. But you have to have more faith in God that he's going to see your way through. And insecurity doesn't fix anything. It doesn't make anything better. Perfectionism. And all perfectionism does, and I've done a few podcasts on Start with Small Steps podcast about perfectionism just paralyzes you where you can't do anything. You'll never make anything perfect. So you get paralyzed because you think, I need to read one more book. I have to learn one more thing. Even with this podcast, it could have been that I did not start this podcast back in podcast only form, which is now about 4 years ago. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. And I just started going. And what Allison at podfeed.com said is just get going, because it'll be your worst episodes for sure. But that's when you start learning, is when you just start acting. And that's really the next part of what he talks about in this book, is action cures almost all of these things. Once you start acting, you lose your fear. Once you start acting, you lose your perfectionism. all the things, even insecurity. You start acting, you start saying, hey, wait, now this is getting better. Just get a resume out. Just start talking to companies. And when you do, you're like, okay, we got this. So like I said, this book was pivotal to me at a very pivotal point. I could see that I could have turned an entirely different way in my life, all because of the way this book is. But we're going to talk about one other thing he really goes into a deep dive about that I found more life-changing than all of these erroneous different emotions that were there. And this is the idea that no one else can push your buttons. That was life-changing to me because I saw my mom. Now, let me say a word about my dad because it's going to be kind of mean towards my dad. He was a genius. He barely had an education. He had a full ride going to college because he was so good at math. And Vietnam got in his way where he could not go to college. He never went to college. And he ended up in the military serving our country. And then when he got back, he came back a very mean drunk. And not only that, he had this ability to fake people out. Like we would go visit my grandmother in Chicago, and he would be able to not drink in front of her. And so when we say, that guy's an alcoholic, he is treating us very poorly, he'd be like, what? I'm fine. Look, I haven't had a drink all week. Can an alcoholic not have? So he set us up all the time. I always joke, I am exactly like him without the drinking and the sarcasm. Now, to me, he was a good dad most of the time when he wasn't drinking, which wasn't that often. But to my mom, he was a disaster. He was so mean to her all the time. And she did not have a very strong ego to begin with. And so when he beat her down, she just didn't have anything in the reserves to fight him off. He didn't beat her down. He didn't hit her. He just cut people down to their core. He just was mean. He was just mean to her. And so what got me about this book is I watched a guy who was mentally, emotionally, and just mean cut a woman who didn't have a lot of emotional strength down to the core all the time. And I thought, when I read this book and I saw him, like I said, first on TV about no one can push your buttons, I suddenly realized, hey, this is my mom's problem. And so I talked to her about it. I said, this book says people can't make you feel something. They cannot make you feel something. And if you let them make you feel something, that person owns your life. As soon as you know another person can control you, can beat you down, can make you feel a certain way, they own you. And not only that, but he's a jerk. And you're letting a jerk own you. If you want to make him stop doing this to you, you have to have it stop working. He does it because it works. And my mom's like, well, you can't change your emotions. If someone makes you feel bad, you just feel bad. And I'm like, no, that's not true. You are the owner of your own emotions. That's what this book says. You can own your own emotions and you can decide that person's not going to make me feel bad. And it never worked for her. It really never did. But what it did is it worked for me because suddenly when he was starting to do all these things that he would try to cut me down, again, I'm a little kid, I'd be like, look, your alcoholism is just messing your brain up and you're just mad because you just don't have any control in your life. So you're just taking it out on the rest of us. And after a while, and it was a very short while, I would say months, he stopped doing it to me. He stopped doing what he did to my mom to me because it wasn't working. He would say something. You're never going to be anything. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll find out, I guess, right? And it suddenly ended it for me. And he realized because it wasn't working, he suddenly stopped doing it to me. And he also stopped doing it to my mom a little bit because, again, if I was there and he would say something, I'm like, that's really a ridiculous statement. You can't put that on someone else. You're the one, who dragged us up here, and you're the one who made us live in this particular area. She had no say in it. And probably you didn't have a say in it because the military tells you where you're going to live. So quit blaming her for this. So then I started standing up for her in being able to rationalize the way out of it because this book taught me how. And so the first thing you got to think about when you're doing this is this 5-second rule. Before reacting, think, is this really worth what he's saying, my peace of mind, is what he's saying worth anything? Now, the one thing I'm very good at, and I'll talk about it in another edition of this podcast and video, is I'm very good at splitting things into, is this valuable? Is there something I could learn from it? Like if my dad says, look, your grades are terrible because you're just not taking school seriously. I could sit and think for a minute, am I taking school seriously? Well, to be honest with you, I thought school was very easy. And so I didn't take school very seriously. I took my own learning very seriously. So I thought, okay, there's probably something valuable in there that I should take school more seriously, because even though I'm learning, I still need good grades to go to college, to get jobs. So he's probably right there. But the part that was a jerk move on his part was the way he said it and how mean he said it. So I skimmed out the half that was worthwhile, and I shoved the part that was not worthwhile away. The next part is reframing it. Again, you think, and this is what I did to that other person who was the area bully, is I said, look, you're just doing this because you just feel beat down by everyone else, is reframing the situation. That person's not being rude to you because they have anything about you or anything that you're doing is causing this. It is because you're the last rung on the ladder. I was a nice little kid. I never beat up anyone. I never got into fights with people. So it was really easy to beat up on me because I just really never fought back. I still don't fight back. I'm still very easy to beat up on. But I realize that about myself now. And I know, you know what? People are just going to beat up on you. It is just how it goes because you don't fight back. And I don't care to fight back. And I'll talk about that some other time. But reframing it and saying, you know what? This is about them. This is a them thing. This is not a me thing. Take again what is me and learn from it, grow from it, but then just dump the rest out of it. And then label the behavior. That's kind of interesting. Or you can say things to people who are beating you down and say, well, I guess that's a take on it, and then just be done with it. Or the other part of it is so what? If someone says, well, Jill, you're a slob, and I am a slob. I am not much of a dresser. I am not much of like a person that looks on the outside of people. I'm always very much a content of the core. And if someone says, you know what, Jill, you're a slob, I'd be like, yep, so what? So what? So that you could do it that way. And then the other part, and you could tell this is where I went on it, is learning how to use humor to shield stuff like that, to be able to joke about situations. And that's where I really went with most of these things. You have to look at why people are doing this to you. And once you understand it, then you can take back control of your reaction. They do it because they want to take control of you. They want you to feel as bad as they feel. You think my dad was trying to help me in most of the cases, or help my mom when he was trying to cut her down? He was just retaliating because he knew he was screwing up this family. He was screwing up everything that was going on in this family with his drinking. One interesting thing I did, that when my mom moved out of her house, I took this box full of check stubs and bills. It was a huge box. I took them home and I entered a few months of them into Quicken. I wanted to know, were we really as poor as I thought we were? Or was he drinking all the money away? And you know what? It was a little of both. We were really poor, but when you looked at our bills, we would have been okay-ish had he not been drinking. I forgot the amount of money he was drinking, but it was well over 25% of our income went to alcohol or his hobbies. It was something very interesting. So why is he yelling at us? Because he realized he's messing up this family and he doesn't want to take the emotional hit for it. He doesn't want to take responsibility that his drinking was destroying all of us. Once I understood that, I understood his motives and why he was doing it. And then the other part of it is that you just have a couple of different techniques. Gaining some sort of an inner silence where you don't respond. And I always, I'm doing this in the Bible in Small Steps podcast and video, where Jesus stood there and they're throwing accusations at him, and he just stood there and had his inner silence. Because sometimes not reacting is the best reaction. It's just the best way, is just to just pray about it and be done with it and not react. Or just imagine that you have compassion. I guess that's the other part of it. I had great compassion for my dad. I know He went to Vietnam and came back an alcoholic. He also comes from a family where every single one of the men became alcoholics. And I realized this was way back before we, or at least I knew, anything about genetics besides fruit flies, is that something is wrong with my family. There is so much alcoholism in my family. I don't want to go down this path. I don't want to go down this direction. So instead, I felt compassion towards him. He, through this method of war and genetics, got caught in this. Besides that, on the military base, I always kind of joke that as a kid, when you left this military base, you either did drugs or you bowled. And I walked out of there with a 160 average. There was a lot of things that people just didn't have anything to do. And so drinking and going to the bar was a big part of it. And because the bar was cheap, they had this ability to drink a lot of money away and have a lot of alcohol. Now that I look back and look back where I live, like I said, that was way up in the North Woods, towards the border of Canada, basically. There were a lot of things that you could do. There was hunting and fishing and skiing and hiking and snowshoeing. I mean, there was a ton of things that you could do. They all required a little bit of effort and some money. And that was probably a lot of it, is that, to get into skiing, you have to get skis. But I had a lot of compassion for him because I knew he got caught into this rut. He didn't want to be there either. And then the other part of it is sharing with other people. Most of the people around me, their families were alcoholics. I was lucky in some sense because I only had one alcoholic parent. Many of my friends had two alcoholic parents. And so in a sense, I felt like I was better off than most of them. But still, we could all share and compare what was going on and understand better what was happening. And so if you find yourself reacting and you find yourself that this person is triggering you into action, why is this bothering me so much? Why is this getting to me? How can I better grow emotionally so it no longer matters to me what this person is saying anymore? So that they no longer push my buttons. That is about you and sort of growing it. And there was an analogy that was given in the book that talks about when you squeeze an orange, you get juice of what's on the inside. What comes out of you is what is on the inside of you. And so when you squeeze a positive person, a person in control of their emotions, a person who has stability and can think away from these erroneous thoughts, you get good juice. When you squeeze someone who is full of anger, sarcasm, vitriolic words, violence, when you squeeze them, that's what you get out of them. How can you get out of that particular rut so that you don't fall into it anymore? And in the end, if you want to be a free human being, if you want to be someone who can exist on this world, you're going to have to learn how to take emotional control over your lives. You're going to have to be someone who grasps and learns how to avoid people pushing your buttons. Now, let me give you one caveat, however, that is kind of hard, is that when you do have someone you do want to have a relationship with, and their advice is possibly good advice, but it's said in the wrong way, it's said at the wrong time, it becomes hard because you want to be that compassionate person. You want to engage with that person. And how do you then not let that person push your buttons? And it is a really hard balance to find. But I think through some work, you can get there with communication. Hey, when you do this to me, it makes me feel very vulnerable. But also getting back to what is on the inside of you. A lot of times when other people treat us in a certain way and we react, it is because, again, what's on the inside of us. It's the kind of juice we have. So my challenge to you is, have you ever stopped and thought about the things that really push your buttons with other people? Is it a coworker or a friend or a spouse or a parent? Someone who just pushes your button. And like I said, they're not doing it to help you. They're not doing this to make you a better person or because they have concern for you. They are doing it for their own inside juice reasons. Anyway, I hope that helps. Please remember that you can subscribe to this as a podcast. I'm Jill from the North Woods. It's called Start with Small Steps. You can find all my podcasts, including a nature podcast, which, boy, we're getting into spring. It's going to start kicking off again with a lot of spring activity, called Buzz, Blossom, and Squeak. And I would love for you to listen to it. It is still just a podcast. I haven't moved it over to YouTube. But it talks about nature right outside your front door, how you can appreciate what's going on around you. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.